Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this trustee learning programme session from Getting On Board. We're here to talk about diversifying trustee boards. I'm Penny from Getting On Board, and you've got a bit of housekeeping from me until I pass over to Catherine Sullivan, who's chairing our panel. The session is being recorded, as you've seen. You will get access to the recording via a Zoom link after the session. Please note that what you type in the chat, if you're typing to the whole group, does appear on that recording, so you might want to bear that in mind. The session recording will also go onto YouTube. That recording will not include the chat. You've been muted on arrival. Please stay on mute unless Catherine comes to you for a question. That helps keep the sound nice and clear for everybody. Closed captions are available. We've enabled them at our end. So if you'd like the subtitles, you need to click CC or closed captions on your own device. Session content is generally specific to England and Wales. Actually, for a session like today, it's probably relevant to wherever you are, possibly in the world. Please absolutely feel free to use the chat to ask questions, to make comments. If you want to ask an anonymous question, sometimes this is the topic in particular that people feel a bit anxious about asking questions about, please feel free to send that directly to me, Penny, through the chat, and then I will read it out for you. A huge thank you to our sponsors, Charisma, Starfish, PPP, Peridot and Diversifying Group. They are all trustee recruitment agencies. We've got Matt here from TPP. It's thanks to their support that this session and other sessions in our trustee learning programme are completely free of charge. And also a big thank you to City Bridge Foundation, who are also supporting this session. So I'm going to pass now over to Catherine, who's chairing the session for us.
Thanks, Penny, and welcome everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today to talk about successes and failures around trustee recruitment. I'm an associate with Getting On Board, and I lead our Transform programme, which is all about diversifying trustee recruitment. But I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by our three panelists today, and I'm going to go around them in turn and ask them to just say hello and a little bit about their experience of trustee recruitment. So Lara, can I come to you first?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Lara Sinola. I currently hold two trustee roles. I'm co-chair of Age UK in Wandsworth, and I'm also a trustee at Helpforce. In terms of my experiences of trustee recruitment, so I've had two experiences at Age UK Wandsworth since I've been chair. Firstly, in 2019, where actually I think we were lucky and managed to kind of trade on the sort of increase in people wanting to volunteer and looking for ways to contribute. And we had a really successful recruitment, managed to had lots of interest and recruited 4 people, 3 of whom ended up joining the board. And then second time was last year. So pretty much the whole of 2023 kind of did a longish recruitment process. I've got 2 really great trustees, but definitely have found it more work this time around.
That's great. Thanks so much for kicking us off, Lara. David, can I come to you next?
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Jenkins. I'm the joint CEO of Merton Centre for Independent Living. We're a disabled charity based in Merton in southwest London. I've been fortunate. I've attended the Getting On Board transformation program, and over the last 6 months or so, we've been successful in recruiting 2 disabled trustees to our board, which I'm really pleased about.
That's great. Thank you very much, David. And last but not least, Matt, can I come to you?
Of course, yeah. Hi, I'm Matt Adams. I work at TPP Recruitment, have done for about 10, 11 years. In that time, about half of that time, I've been recruiting to CEO and board level vacancies for charities large and small across the UK. And sometimes that's one individual, very specific vacancy. Sometimes it's 4 or 5 vacancies with a much broader range of different skills required.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. So I'd just like to kick our conversation off. We're hoping it's going to be really conversational, a bit of back and forth going on. So it's less question focused and more discussion points. And hopefully people will comment in the chat, as Penny said, and we'll pick up those as we go along. But particularly around the work that I do around Transform, I reflect a lot about it. Some of them, it's the same questions all the time that we're getting around, some same common themes around the fact that people put off trustee recruitment. They find it really I don't know, nerve-wracking, or they find it really difficult or really challenging to do. And I just sort of wondered if people would mind giving us their thoughts on why we thought it was something that people continuously found difficult, that it wasn't something that people, found, did it once and then it was easy. Lara, in particular, what you said is that sort of 4 years ago, you found the experience very fruitful, and then, you know, I'm sure you didn't do anything vastly different, and that you found it a bit more challenging. So that's what I'd like to kick us off with, if that's okay. I don't know who wants to come in first.
I'll come in first, just off the back.
Thanks, Laura.
Actually, we did do a lot different this time around because we had to, in terms of to try and generate more interest. But more generally, in terms of why I think people find it difficult, I think your point about treating it as a one-off might be one of the issues, because really trustee recruitment is something that is cyclical. You're going to have to keep on doing it. And so one of the things that we found is, honestly, we started a succession plan in my charity. Our CEO has been great at putting that together, and actually just thinking consistently about what are the gaps and who we might need to fill, so you don't reach a point where you've got kind of like a few gaps and it becomes a really urgent requirement, but actually you're thinking as you go. And it also means that then you have a range of tenures of people who've been on the board, rather than just getting an influx of new people who are kind of new and figuring it out and getting inducted. You've got people who can learn from those who've been on the board for longer.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Laura. And I think that tenure piece and that sort of how it can incorporate into good governance is something I'd like to pick up later on. But I think if we look at that sort of it not being a one-off approach, at Matt and David, I don't know if you've got anything that you want to add to that.
Yeah, I guess from our perspective, our board of trustees, we're of a certain age profile, and as an organisation, for us supporting deaf and disabled people, we were concerned that we didn't really reach out to the younger generation, and so we were quite keen to sort of proactively recruit to that age range and to bring that sort of younger perspective to the way that we implement our strategy, the way that we implement the services that we provide. And as I'm pleased to say that we do have some younger people now on our board, and we're really interested to hear their views on how we connect with the young disabled people of our borough.
That's great, and I think that kind of ties in with what Lara was saying before, though, isn't it? That you were very conscious that you wanted to reflect your service users or beneficiaries or members. People have different terminology for those things, but you wanted to be able to do that, and so being your organisation itself has to be appealing to those people. So it kind of that isn't that one-off, like we're going to recruit to how we are exactly now, and that's going to bring the right people to our board, is it? You know, I know you spent a lot of time reflecting on what you wanted to do to open up your organisation in that respect.
Yes, no, absolutely, because we, 87% of our trustees are disabled or have long-term health condition, and the two trustees that we've recruited both have long-term health conditions as well. So they bring that kind of user-led experience, which is really, really vital for us, because that just helps us implement more service provision.
That's great. Apologies if you heard my dog there. The postman arrived and he decided that now was the only time of the day he'll bark. Apologies for that. Matt, I'm sure you've got a range of experiences in this, sort of yourself doing it, but also watching organisations do that recruitment piece. What would you like to add to that?
I think echoing what's been said already, I think Laura's point about being continuously aware of and thinking about trustee recruitment, because in a good proportion of the examples where we're asked to help, it's probably got to the point where there are 3 or 4 gaps that need to be addressed rather urgently, and that's the point at which they feel that we can add value. So I think there's more of that happening across the sector. There's a lot of that happening across the sector, sorry, and I think it's possibly just due to the fact that a trustee role is so busy, so varied. You want to focus so much on delivering delivering impact and delivering against the goals of the charity that actually this is hard. This can be difficult, and it's often put to one side until it really has to be addressed. So yeah, that's probably what I've seen across the experience I've had so far.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you all of you for starting off that conversation. I think talking about the things when it goes wrong is also something that we're probably not really good at doing as a sector, because we want to celebrate the things when it goes well. So if you've had a successful recruitment campaign or you've done a fantastic activity in your organization, they're the things that we put on LinkedIn and put on our social media, and it goes on our newsletter. And it means it can be a little bit isolating as well. So when some people join the Transform program, they think that they're the only people who struggle with trustee recruitment. It must be something that I'm doing wrong. And that's certainly not my experience, working with a range of organizations around that. And I wonder if there's something about, when things haven't gone well, sorry. Has anybody got any reflections on sharing those things to help people understand, they're not by themselves, because this happens, but also some of the things to avoid doing. So one of which is obviously only looking at it as a single thing and waiting till it's really, really urgent, and then you have to do the quickest thing that you can do. But I'm interested in what other sort of things that have gone wrong, other failures, I guess.
I mean, we had an example where one of our trustees said to me, he said, Dave, he said, I do not understand your the financial reports that you produce. I just don't understand it. And I said, Chris, look, why don't we just take some time out? You come into the office and I'll just go through the financial reports with you, because they are complex, particularly, if you're a trustee, we're meeting maybe 5 times a year. It's quite a gap between each meeting, and it's a lot, I think, to take on, and sort of being able to offer interim sort of meetings, or just come in, have a cup of coffee, and I'll go through it with you, just explain it nice and in a kind of simple way, so that he gets a grasp or understands when we're saying, we've got profit, or we're going to have an underspend or an overspend. Then it's not something that he finds really difficult to understand. And I found that quite helpful. It kind of makes it a bit more real, because finances, certainly from our perspective, are complicated.
And it's something that people don't have experience of as well, isn't it? That you don't have to have looked at budgets and done profit and loss, or surplus and underspend and overspend and restricted income. You don't have to have done any of that to become a trustee. So getting to grips with that, I think that leads up, one of the things that I find really difficult is the fact that trusteeship is not talked about, more generally speaking. So you're going into this with lots of unknowns. It's not something, you're having to overcome that barrier when you're recruiting around that. So all the things that you can do to explain what you do, how you do it, and those finer points as well. Any other reflections, Matt and Lara?
I think it's probably worth something along the lines of the later you leave, or the longer into the process you leave a piece of trustee recruitment, or the more you think about a very, very specific profile that you're looking for from a trustee. Obviously you're narrowing the field by putting in criteria, and that can have impact in terms of both the volume of applicants that you're likely to receive, but also the diversity of the pool as well. So I think we see a lot of instances where people come to us with a really specific idea of what they're looking for from the trustee, which just makes it problematic. And it's there are probably things that could have happened in the run up to that decision making process to make it so that didn't need to be as specific as it is when it comes to the market.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, Matt. I think that we trick ourselves into thinking that there are really specific things that you have to have on a board. And I did once work with an organisation who thought it was a requirement for you to have a legal person, a financial person, an HR person on your board. And we sort of pigeonhole that. And I always challenge back on to do what is the add to the board on that. Lara, I'd like to bring you in there.
I think from my perspective, some of the things that haven't worked in terms of trustee recruitment is when we haven't been really clear almost on the trajectory of what we expect from the trustee and how much involvement there's going to be. If particularly we're sort of, in a sense, priming them for one of the more sort of time intensive roles in the organization, just being really clear on what's required, for example, treasurer, or one of the other roles, or even potentially, someone who might be interested in, taking over as chair one of these days, helping them to understand what exactly is involved in that. Because I think potentially if you're just a kind of regular trustee, it can be, if you don't go to a subcommittee, if you're not necessarily getting involved in fundraising events, you're kind of just sent some papers every few months, you read through the papers, you go to the meeting. The meetings are often online. Don't actually, it's not as time intensive as it might be if you choose to get more involved. And I think possibly just, yeah, making it clearer that step up in what's required if you're going to take a more prominent role on the board as a trustee. And yeah, we've definitely had to have that conversation, especially if they're new to the trustee role entirely, like it's their first trustee role. I think it's quite good to give people a little bit of sort of, yeah, time to grow in the role.
Absolutely. And not just if they're new, because, you know, obviously every charity does it slightly differently. So your expectations in one organization might be totally different from those in a different one. So I think expectation management is really helpful. And I often get asked, you know, what's an ideal number of meetings that we should have a year? It depends what you've got to discuss and how you want to discuss them. But being whatever you have got in place, you know, if it's designed specifically for your organization and if it's deliberate, then sharing that information with prospective candidates helps to manage their expectations. So you can to do that. Let's go on, Lara. Yeah, go on.
We actually ask prospective trustees to shadow a board meeting before they decide if they want to join. I don't know the extent to which that happens in others, but it happened with me when I joined my board, and I found it really useful because actually you get a bit more of a sense of the meeting, of the personalities and the characters. You know, it may be that it's just kind of not really a good fit, or you kind of look at the conversation and think, I'm not sure if I can contribute here, and you get a chance to kind of decide if you want to join us. And I think that's also quite a good way of giving people a little bit more of an insight into what it's actually like, as opposed to just what's written on the page in the job description.
Definitely. I think that's absolutely brilliant. It's certainly something that we are getting on board advice to include in a trustee recruitment process, because ultimately lots of things are on paper, but decisions are people based. And you're absolutely right, you can't get a sense of what those people's conversations are like unless you're in the room with them, whether that's online or in person. But talking to them and understanding how they approach questions or difficulties or challenges. That seems to resonate with Matt and David. I don't know if either of you want to chip in there.
Yeah, I think for sure. We asked sort of Daniel and Kirsten to shadow one of our board meetings, and the other challenge obviously they have is because they're younger individuals, they work. So our board meetings tend to be 11 till 1 on a Thursday, and that's not great timing for them. So we have to, well, we make sure that to make it accessible, that we can do a combination of in-person and sort of Zoom stroke Teams call. And we make sure that they have the papers well in advance of the meeting so they can review all the details. And I think that works really well for us. I think the other point I was going to make was that in terms of a couple of our trustees who are quite visible in our community, they they sort of represent our organisation at external meetings as well, talking about disability rights. And that's, for us, we are able to provide them with additional training, additional leadership training that they can then use in their work sort of outside of being a trustee with Merton Sill. So I don't want to say we've given them a platform for their voice, but we've been able to support them when they're trying to develop themselves as individuals in the borough.
Yeah, it's not a one-way street, is it? It's a mutual. The great trusteeships should be where everybody benefits. The charity, the organisation, the board, and the individual trustee as well. Matt, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, just to add to that part around shadowing, I think, because really would strongly recommend that, and we really do with our clients when we work with them. For the people connection element, because you want to make sure it's the right fit for everybody. But I think it offers so much reassurance to people during the recruitment process. You can see that that this is an organisation that is going to help me understand what it's like to be a trustee and to be a trustee at this charity, because particularly if you want to appeal to people that have never been a board member before, which is likely to be the case, I suspect. So that board shadowing is a really important way to help overcome that perspective barrier, where people would otherwise just make an assumption about, well, I don't know if I can add anything, or actually I don't know how that meeting's going to run, and actually the shadowing can really help to break that barrier down.
Absolutely, and the language around it is so closed off and exclusive, isn't it? Sort of a board meeting in and of itself. Sometimes I say those words to my children, I've got a board meeting, or and often I'm just shadowing or attending, observing on behalf of somebody, and they look at me like with big eyes, like this is something that they've heard of on the telly, that it's this very posh, very big round table, and it's all very mahogany and all. And 99% of my board meetings I've been to have not been like that. So even in the recruitment cycle before you get to a board observation piece, what are our board meetings like? Well, what do we mean by a board meeting in the first place? What's included? I think they can be really powerful things to unpick those either expectations or lack of expectations, almost sort of with that. And I think it's interesting that we've talked about two different types of things. There's some logistical things, so time and date of meetings, whether they're in person, whether they're online, all those kind of things. And you're not going to be able to sue anybody, but being, again, I think open and honest about that in the recruitment process is really helpful. But I think it's also about how you make decisions. And I wondered if we could just sort of move on to how you found the decision making of recruitment on your boards, because it's another area that people talk to me a little bit about, like who gets to decide who's on the board, who decides things like, are we doing like the process? So are we doing an interview? What the questions are, if we are, can we send them in advance? Like all those kind of things. I don't know who wants to jump in first, but I'd just be really interested to hear your experiences of that bit of the process.
I think for us, we when we had interest in the roles, we made sure that they had informal discussions with our chair. Just came into the office, had an informal discussion about what the expectation was. And I think one of the things, Catherine, from the sort of getting on board transformation program is when you do have a job description or a trustee description, you make it as easy to follow as possible. We're not recruiting for the governor of Bank of England, where we're just recruiting for some support, maybe somebody who has some sort of financial knowledge. And so I think putting the individuals at ease really helped. And as Matt was saying, that kind of creating that connection as well was really important. They, as I say, they shadowed a meeting with us, and then at our AGM in December, they were voted on through that process. So they were nominated, seconded, and then voted on.
And who decided that process, David? Was that a collective decision that would be what you did, or how did you manage that bit of it?
I think that's how we've always done it. If I'm honest, I think if it's probably in a policy somewhere that this is how we will recruit trustees to our board, and it works well, and the process seemed to work. We didn't rush the prospective trustees. We wanted to give them enough time to consider what the commitment was, and that seemed to work as well.
Yeah, great. Matt, Lara, different experiences of who makes the decisions in that process?
Not particularly. I think in the main, the vast majority of clients we work with have already, not always, but have mostly got a subcommittee, a pre-agreed subcommittee of members of the board who have delegated the responsibility to recruit the trustees, and it would normally include the chair, because as David said, that informal conversation with the chair for applicants is a really important part of the process. So it will normally have stemmed from a conversation as to that the committee would have those delegated powers to make recommendations for a full vote at the board to then to have those members join the team.
Great. And Lara, what about yourself?
I think I'm definitely lucky because I'm a co-chair. I have another co-chair, so shout out for co-chairing trustee role here, because I've been doing it for almost 6 years and it's been fantastic. So the two of us and the CEO, I mean, we discuss it at board meetings normally when we're thinking about sort of, again, that pipeline of recruitment. And then myself and my co-chair Jenny will go away and chat with our chief executive Natalie about what we want to do. I have to admit, we haven't got like a very, very formal process, and it's an interesting one because I was part of a very formal process for the trustee role that I joined in June. And so it's very, very different. I had to apply on the website, and then I had a conversation with chief exec, and then I had a formal panel interview. Yeah, I think that was interesting, but we're more of a kind of, you express an interest. We have introduced application forms and kind of diversity monitoring, which we didn't have I think the first time around in 2019, and that's something that our chief exec has introduced to make it a little bit more professional. But we don't then have an interview. It would be an informal conversation with me initially. I kind of, how we split it up, I lead on the trustee recruitment, and then they'll go away and have a think about it. If they're still interested, then they'd observe a board meeting, and then they'd introduce themselves at the end or the beginning of the board meeting, and they could ask questions if they want. And then again, if they're still interested and we're still interested, then I'd suggest they have a conversation with my co-chair and or our chief exec. And it kind of be at the end of that process that then we'd recommend them to the board to join. So that's how we've done it.
Fantastic. So it's actually quite different there. So you've got somewhere the members make a decision, you've got somewhere it's the board, you've got formal subcommittees. And again, I think that's quite important to reflect on, is that if there was a single way that this was perfect, somebody would have found it and they would be selling it to us, probably over market rate. But there are a number of different ways. And I think that deliberate sort of consideration of those things, I think, is quite helpful from a recommendation point to do that, what's involved in that process. Whichever one of those processes that you've described there, there's quite a lot of steps in them, even if they're quite informal. How do you manage the sort of workload around the trustee recruitment? Because again, it is one of the things that I think goes back to what you were saying before, Matt, about people who maybe put off the recruitment process because, and I think it might contribute to that, is the workload allocation. So I'd be really interested to hear about how you tackle that in your organizations, or your experiences of that.
Well, from our perspective, we try to allocate one of our trustees to maybe be the sort of de facto lead on HR, maybe on finance, maybe on the legal aspect. But we're not expecting them to read up, law journals or anything like that. It's just that if there is some training that becomes available, we might suggest, if they have the time, maybe go on, I don't know, basic finance for your charity. Or so tomorrow, for example, we have good governance training for all our trustees, which everybody attends, and we make sure that we also have safeguarding training for all our trustees as well. So we make sure that, well, we try to make sure that they are exposed to the kind of the key elements, I suppose, that keeps everybody safe.
Yeah, and the sort of trustee training element of it is probably something that people are a bit nervous about when they apply. How am I going to know what I'm supposed to do? It's quite a common question, isn't it? Thinking a little bit about how you allocate out the workload around trustee recruitment in particular. So who writes an advert, who is responsible for making sure the advert gets to the people that you want to apply, who's responsible for writing interview questions if you have them, those kind of things. Like, how do you allocate those things across your organizations, or what's your experience of seeing that in other organizations? Lara, can I come to you first? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So this time around, it was one of the staff members in organization who our CEO kind of gave her this piece of work to help us look at our job description. So we decided to have a sort of recruitment pack and to kind of make it look really sort of presentationally really good, and have a dedicated page on our website. So I worked with her, so she was drafting that and then sharing it with the CEO and then myself, and we were reviewing that information. So definitely was helpful to have some kind of support from a paid staff member, as opposed to it all being on the trustees. And then in terms of once it went up, it was just kind of myself and probably the chief exec doing things like posting it on LinkedIn, and it had my email address on the website. So I then just got in emails and would respond to them as and when I got emails, and booking an informal conversation, often before they fill in the full application form, because I think it's better to have a conversation and understand a little bit more about the role and if it's right for you before you then go in and fill in the application. You need references and the whole thing. So normally I'd suggest we just have a quick chat. And I think that way of doing it worked quite well. Also, we did a lot of work to make our recruitment pack look really professional, but now we have it, it's a lot easier then to update it. So I think in terms of the amount of work, we did a lot of that work this time around. So hopefully that'll be helpful in the future.
Yeah, which I think is a really good point, actually, and particularly going back to your original point about it being not a one-off, that this is it's almost like a continuous cycle. The things that you do now will definitely help you in the future. Whether you've got policies on it or process agreed, and that's obviously, David, what you were saying before, that you've had a process and it's been agreed back in the day, you use it because it's worked for you. There's no need to have to rethink that every single time, which is useful. Don't know if you want to jump in.
Yeah, no, it works for us, and we've just tried to simplify the process in terms of simplifying the kind of description of what the expectation is, just to make it more attractive, I think, people. But we are on a continuous cycle of trying to, make sure that we have succession planning at the top, so when the chair moves on, that we have somebody who can sort of come into that, take on that role. So it's a constant cycle, but we now have 9 trustees, and we have an active and interested board. So yeah, we're in a good spot at the moment.
Can't ask for more than that. Maybe we should get you to recruit the governor of the Bank of England. Maybe better that. Matt, can I bring you in there, because that must be something that you see a lot in the work that you do around who does what, and they bring you in partly to do some of that, not for them, but sort of help them with that element of it.
Yeah, we definitely. Yeah, I was going to flippantly say that's kind of our. They give us that job to do it for them, but I think it's a real mixed bag, actually. I'd say more often than not, our point of contact would be the chair that's taken responsibility for the process to lead on the communication with us. But actually, it could be, as David said, a trustee that is the kind of de facto HR specialist, or a trustee that has raised their hand because they've got an interest in that particular part of the of governance, or just the person that's got capacity, because I guess if everyone's busy doing other things and there's a trustee that has capacity, then I could imagine that being a way to allocate the job of doing it. But I think in the main it's led by the chair. But yeah, I think it's really dependent on circumstances and each individual charity, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fine. I think that's kind of the message that I like to bring across, in that there's no single way of doing that. Sort of connected to that, though, is around the role of the chief exec, if you have one in your organisation. Obviously, not every charity does have one, but the role of the chief exec with the board is, we have many sessions on that in its own right, because it's complex and brilliant. But particularly when it comes to trustee recruitment, and very recently I've had some interesting conversations with people with polar opposite perspectives around how much a chief exec should be involved in the recruitment process. And I've just wonder if any of you have either strong feelings or just sort of just reflections on how you've handled that element of the process in the past.
From our experience, the prospective trustees have kind of wanted to speak with myself and my other joint CEO. They wanted to have that meeting and have that discussion, and I think it's really important, because it kind of creates a relationship. So when you're going into the board meeting, it's more of a kind of consultative and collective decision-making process, rather than a sort of, oh my gosh, the board is sitting there, we're sitting up here, and it's like a barrier between us. We're all trying to do best we can with the resources that we have. And I think having that connection is yeah, it's really important. And I think Daniel and Kirsten are great, and yeah, we're really pleased. But it's so important to, in my view anyway, to have that initial discussion. And I would always want to speak with a prospective trustee.
Yeah, fantastic. And also, just before I move on to somebody else, that bigging up for the chief exec model and the co-chair model, getting on board of a co-chair as well. I'm a co-chief exec, and so is David. So this is marvelous. We're all here flying the flag for joint leadership models, which is excellent. So yeah, I don't know, Lara, do you want to talk about how it worked in your organisation, or the things that you've come across in the one that you've just been appointed to in June?
Very similar to what David said. In terms of definitely our prospective trustees, you often have asked to speak to the chief exec, but also I think it's good because the chief exec gives a different perspective on the organisation and how it works, and from speaking to the chair or other trustees. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about it until you just asked the question whether or not there can be downsides to the chief exec being involved in the recruitment process, but I have to admit, for the role I just joined, I have no idea whether or not the chief exec had a veto. They weren't on the formal interview panel. It was just it was like an informal discussion. But how informal are these discussions? If we're going to be brutally honest about it. It'd be interesting to see peek behind the curtain and find out to what extent, because part of you wonders, could you potentially, absolutely no shade to chief execs, but be like, oh, I'm not sure I want that trustee because I think they might be quite hard and they might be quite challenging, and that's not what you want. So yeah, I think involved in the process but not the ones that make the decision, I think, would be my conclusion.
Yeah, I think that balance of those two things is probably where I was coming from. I did speak to a trustee recently who thought the chief exec should just do the recruitment, which I thought was fascinating, genuinely fascinating. That's not what happened in their organisation afterwards. But it was I think it is about workload for them. They were thinking it's about capacity, which I know, Matt, you've just referenced there before in terms of that. I don't know if you've seen any other extreme versions of conversations that you've had.
No, not really. I was thinking about it. I think it's the norm for it to be a team, a joint effort between the CEO and the board. And I'd find it strange if there were a CEO and they weren't involved in some way or another, or at least accessible, if not having been, because it could be that they've been involved prior to coming to a recruitment agency, and that what we then see is what's presented by the team as that this is what we're doing. But I would always have expected the CEO to have played a part, as Lara and David had said, perhaps without the decision making power. But yeah, I'd definitely a team effort from my perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. That's what it's all about, really, isn't it? I am going to move on in a second. I just wanted to remind people, we've got loads and loads of people online at the moment. If you want to ask any questions, there is going to be some time at the end, but don't wait until the end. If you want to ask something, feel free to put it in there. Or if you've got a particular challenge that you're facing at the moment, or a question, and as Penny said, if you want to do that privately, do feel free to message Penny directly, and she will filter that through to me in a minute. But just moving on, so we've talked a little bit about sort of the traps and some of the challenges. I'd like to flip that on its head and talk about some of the successes, because that's really probably what people are here to listen to, is what's gone well. But I'd like to start that question, sort of bit of the conversation with, how do we know it's gone well? So there is something about the numbers, and I know David, you've mentioned the specifics of the numbers of trustees that you've had, and that was really important for where you were from a governance perspective. But obviously it's not just about the numbers, is it? So just people's reflection on how will you know when your trustee recruitment has gone well? What's important to you, either as an individual, or maybe you might have thought about it as an organisation in that. And actually, Matt, can I come to you first? Is that okay on that one?
Yeah. I mean, I think taking the longer term view, it's that you've made steps against the strategic goals that you've set yourself as a charity, and that you've done it in such a way that you've included the voices of everybody around the board table. I'd say it's the shorter term, it's gone well when you've got people that are committed to the charity, you know, believe in the cause, are contributing at meetings, regularly taking part in the things they should be taking part in, whether that's just a meeting or kind of subcommittees and, you know, other events and things like that. But longer term, it would then, to the end to which you've got the people on board is obviously to instigate change and impact. So it would be to have achieved more, you know, perhaps if with a focus on diversity, with a, you know, you've achieved more with maybe a more diverse impact. But maybe that's too longer term an answer.
No, I think it's a great answer. All answers are valid on this call, for sure. I think it's a great perspective, though, and probably one of the things that we don't do when we leave it to the last minute to recruit is we stop thinking about our long-term strategic goals, and we start thinking about, I need bums on seats. I need numbers of people. You know, we can't function with this many trustees. It's not, you know, doable. So we need somebody who can look at our finances or who can look at our HR. Yeah, I think it's really helpful. David.
Yeah, I think there's been a bit of a sea of change, I think, sort of after the pandemic. When we started doing the trustee meetings in person, we're now finding right, they'll all contribute and ask questions. And I think to the original question, I think when we have our board meeting actually on Thursday, and I'm hoping and expecting that the sort of 2 new trustees will raise questions or ask questions or have ideas and challenge us as well as an organization. And you know, I think that's to be welcomed. So that's what I'm kind of looking for and hoping, going, oh yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, or God, that's a really great idea, we should be doing that. That to me would indicate some degree of success for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. And I think it is, well, kind of going back to a few different things we've talked about, but certainly the chief exec being in a position that they want to be challenged in that way, and being open in that recruitment process to say, what I'm looking for is someone who can add to those discussions. And here's, you know, a number of different ways that you might do that. Lara, love to get your reflections on that.
Yeah, no, completely agree with both David and Matt, particularly about thinking a little bit longer term in terms of what your measures of success are beyond, I guess, them not leaving the board super fast, which is definitely one key measure. I think also another key measure is kind of looking at the diversity of the board and whether or not you feel like you have moved in the direction that you wanted to. So I think we wanted to have more sort of younger and working age people on the board. And that was something we focused on in the 2019 recruitment. Yeah, we got 3 young diverse women to join our board, which was really great, and felt like actually I think they're providing a really interesting perspective. They also engage more with things like our social media and are promoting it and posting about it, and actually them doing things outside of just purely the meetings is definitely for me a measure of success. And you know, having conversations and interacting with the chief exec and others outside of myself or outside of formal subcommittees. We have a WhatsApp group, so you know, people actually responding on the chat about questions and coming to fundraising events, and getting to meet our volunteers and our members of staff, and them getting to know the trustees more, because I do think that's one thing that sometimes you don't see them that much. You kind of just hear about this board, but the staff members don't actually know who they are. So yeah, if your members of staff actually know who your trustees are, I think that's definitely a really positive measure of success.
That's great. There's so much in there, Lara. That's absolutely brilliant. And from all 3 of you on that. I think that it is something we talk about quite a lot on the Transform programme, about staff thinking this trustee board is this sort of ephemeral thing that it exists over there, and sometimes new trustees or even prospective trustees are shown round by staff members who don't understand what a trustee is and are talking to them about trusteeship. So it's really interesting thing. I am going to go to the chat, and we do have a couple of things in the chat. Thanks, Penny, for putting in Reach is diversity audit tool, so feel free to click that link if you're new to that space. But Amy's asked a question, is where are the best places to advertise for board members to get a more diverse application pool? And it's a really well-timed question, Amy, so thank you for doing that, because what Lara was certainly reflecting on there, or what I picked up from what Lara was reflecting on, was around relationships. with people. So I think it's about, you know, how can you build those? So I wonder if the panel have got any reflections on Amy's question from the chat, where you found success maybe, or your approach to it.
I don't mind.
Yeah,
I mean,
great, thanks, Matt.
I've got quite a few things to say. I mean, firstly, to point you towards the report produced by Getting on Board last year about year before, about diversifying board and recruiting trustees, because there's a really good section on just this, where to advertise to find and diversify your board. But I think there are a number of paid for options and free options, and I think that ranges from charity sector job boards to specific networking groups where the people that you're looking to speak to are networking, whether that's on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. But it could be a finance forum, a marketing forum if you're looking for specific skills. There are a number of groups that that target different other groups, so young trustees movement, and you know, there are equivalent groups across all of the different characteristics. So I think, but particularly the section in that report is really detailed and sets out lots of both free and paid for suggestions that I would thoroughly recommend. So I'd take a good look through that.
That's great. Thanks for starting us off. And Penny has put in the chat a link to Diversifying Your Charities Board, which was written by our wonderful colleague Sophia Moreau, amongst others, pulling that together. There's a few organisations that you've referenced there, and we'll come back to some of those as well later on. But Lara and David, have you got sort of reflections on your own advertising routes?
For us, actually, because we work really within the disabled community, it was more word of mouth, if I'm honest. So we had a situation where one of our trustees was the son of somebody we were supporting, and he was interested in becoming more actively involved. So that was one route. And one of the other trustees was just in our building and actively sought us out because we had the advertisement on our website. So so we were lucky, really. We weren't advertising everywhere or on those locations that Matt's just alluded to, but yeah, we got lucky because I think we are quite a specific community that we're recruiting with too. Sorry.
No, and I think that's a really, really good point. It's about, you know, the things that you're looking for, and it kind of builds on what Matt was saying. If you're looking for something specific, you go to specific places to look for that. So it's a kind of a non-answer in a way, because it's sort of everywhere, but depending on what you want. But I think understanding what you want is really, really important. And once you get there, that those you know, relationships are strong. You know, when you get people, it's very, very common with charities that are around a very specific health condition or a specific community, is that people have lived experience, that they have connections to those communities. So they want to be committed, they want to contribute, they want to give something back. That give something back phrase, I think, is really commonly used. But I'll stop talking. Lara, do come in with your reflections.
I think I'm a little conflicted on this. I think there are both positives to targeting specific areas and groups and websites, but also it really does, in a sense, narrow the pool of who potentially might see it. Because when I think about trustee recruitment, I'm not just thinking about the people who already know what a trustee is and are looking for roles. And I think potentially if you're going for websites and LinkedIn groups and networks, they're already the cohort of people who know what a trustee is, are already interested in it, they're potentially looking for roles. I want to tap the people who don't even know what it is, but would be an amazing trustee if we managed to find out how to get to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or might already be doing something kind of similar, but maybe for like a church group or a community group, but they don't understand that that's what a trustee is and the terminology, and that actually it would be really, they'd be able to apply those same skills in a more formal role. And I think that's the eternal challenge. I think personally, I try and talk to everyone I know about it. I think in my kind of an older millennial, lots of my peers don't know anything about these roles and haven't been involved in it. So I do try and just talk about it as much as possible and post about it on LinkedIn. In terms of specific roles, we did post on some of the board websites, which was really interesting, but that is kind of, you know, your standard target market. But also I think, you know, more broadly, so we actually got one of our trustees from Instagram. We have a really kind of buzzing Instagram channel where we post a lot from our day center, working with our clients, and actually someone saw that and inquired. And I think maybe thinking about it, rather than it being almost you're looking for trustees, is you're looking for people who are interested maybe in volunteering more generally, because your pool of volunteers can also then become your pool of trustees. And I think also if you're thinking about it in a long-term thing, they might be a volunteer for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then actually, you know, something as they get older, and I think I'd quite like to get involved in this and use some of my professional skills as opposed to, you know, coming into the day center or befriending somebody. You have a pool of people who know about the organization and what you're doing that then you can start to tap into for those trustee roles as well.
Yeah, great. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you for all of you. But Laura, I think that brings us back to the full circle of what you said originally. This isn't a standalone one-off thing that you just do at the end of a process. I think that's really, really helpful. And again, that real reflection time. There's a reason the Transform program starts with working out who you need on your board, because it's different for everybody. It's unique to your time. You know, what you're looking for now isn't going to be what you're looking for in 5 years' time. It's not what you looked for 5 years ago. So really having those very deliberate considerations, you know, regularly, what is it I'm looking for? Linking it to the strategy, as we've said before, linking it to the, you know, suiting the needs of your beneficiaries and how they change over time, I think is really, really helpful. Definitely, there are some great organisations that target people who don't necessarily know about being trustees. So Young Trustees Movement, they go out and to try and educate. Queer Trustees is another one. We know Action for Trustee Racial Diversity. And we work very closely with Malcolm, John, on getting on board across a few programs, but to open up the gates, I suppose, what has been very gatekeeped. It's not even a word, but it is now. It's on a live recording and everything. But I think where people have historically have kept things very much that someone coined it on a Transform program a wee while ago, and I used it all the time, which is the tap on the shoulder recruitment. And it doesn't mean that networks aren't important, as David's just outlined. They are really important to be able to bring your work to life to people who it matters to. But that really broad sense. So Amy, there's a lot out there, I'm afraid. Just conscious of time, I do have a question I'd like to pose for the panel before I hand back over to Penny. And it's about, you know, if you could commit to always doing one thing every single time you recruit a trustee, what would that one thing be? The kind of absolute core of the thing that you would need, that you would want to do. And I'm going to start with Matt. Sorry, I put you on the spot there with that question. It's a killer question.
That's all right. I think I would have an open recruitment process, by which I mean a set process through which all the trustees join the board. And I do understand that's not always the case, but I think having that process where you've got a standardized application process, you've got some material that a wider pool of candidates can see, with taking on board the inclusive language in the advertising and the marketing of the advert for the role as well. So I think even just having that standardized process, I think would provide it provides that regularity to how trustees are brought to the board and standardizes the process. So I think that for me would be the thing I'd always encourage.
That's great, thank you. Laura, can I come to you next? That's okay.
Yeah, sure. I think my thing would be, thinking about it from the perspective of a chair, is to have as open a mind as possible. I know that often we're looking for specific roles, or we think we have gaps that we specifically need to fill, but sometimes you don't know what the gap is until you find someone and you think, oh wow, they have a really maybe different way of viewing a problem, and thinking about all types of diversity, such as those who are neurodiverse and kind of approach problems in a different way. So just trying to have as open a mind as possible, and being conscious when you are pulling together your packs for trustee recruitment that to try and look at it to make it so that someone reading it doesn't rule themselves out automatically.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've done it myself in job roles and stuff where I think I know the stats say that I'm, you know, I will rule myself out if I don't meet, you know, 100% of the criteria, and yet I still do it. I think, well, I can't do that one and that one and that one, so I won't even bother to apply. And so trying to think of it from the other end is, I don't want to make it so sort of the criteria so tight that really good people rule themselves out from even just having a conversation, because it might be, you know, maybe not right now, but we'd love to have you. Would you like to think about getting involved in some other way? What about in the future? So yeah, I just want to try and be as open-minded as you possibly can.
That's great, Lara. Thank you. And last but not least, David.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I agree completely with Lara, actually. And I think the real crux for me would be at that decision point, would the individual be a benefit to our organization? Yes or no? And if the answer's yes in my mind, then yeah, perfect.
Find a way to get them on that board.
Yeah,
yeah, definitely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's one last reflection from me. We've just had a cohort of people go through a program, and one of their reflections at the end were, do you know what, we've probably got room for a few more than we thought we did. You know, their governing document doesn't say they've got a capped number. They're sitting at 7, and they were like, you know, we were thinking about 1 or 2, but actually if we get up to 12, then we've got some ramp on kind of activity that we can do. We can really think about succession planning. We can share the workload and all the rest of it. I want to thank the panelists today, Matt, Lara and David, for joining us and for sharing. We could have been talking about this for simply hours. I'm hoping that you will join us again in future programmes. I'm going to hand across to Penny. I know you've been answering the chat as it's been going on for some of the other questions that we didn't have chance to get in there, and putting links to various organisations. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks so much, Catherine, Lara, David and Matt. It was a really, really interesting conversation. I've put a link to the evaluation form in the chat. You'll also get that when you come off the Zoom. It'll come up automatically. We'd love to know what you thought of this session. There's also a box on that evaluation form for any suggestions for other sessions. That's how we source all of our topics for this trustee learning programme. So do tell us if you've got any other ideas for sessions. I put a link to the trustee learning programme in the chat as well. So this is one of the sessions of that programme. They're all completely free. They're all online. They're all for and about trustees. Do share them with your colleagues, with your fellow trustees, with whoever. We also have lots of sessions for potential trustees as well. So people who might be interested in trusteeship. A big thank you to Charisma, Starfish, TPP, Peridot and Diversifying Group, and to City Bridge Foundation. Thanks to their support, the session was free of charge. And I hope to see you at another session soon. So thank you all very much. I hope you all have a lovely afternoon.